Hi, welcome to Board Gems, my regular video series with new videos on the 3rd, 13th, and 23rd of every month, in which I cover an older board game gem. A lot of times, they're hidden gems. This is not a hidden gem because it won Game of the Year in, I think, 2006, and that's a big deal. And it's Thurn and Taxis. This was designed by Karen and Andreas Seyfarth, husband and wife team, was published by Hans im Gluck, with art from Michael Menzel. Now, that is a very famous board game artist now, but when this came out in 2006, he was just kind of entering the industry. We've seen a couple of games before this one, like, let's see, he did Jambo and Hacienda and maybe Roma. I think he did Roma. But 2006, he did this and Pillars of the Earth, both of which were big releases and got him a lot of attention, and he's a very celebrated board game artist now. And, of course, Andreas Seyfarth is someone who almost needs no introduction in the hobby, because almost every board game that he has designed has been notable in some way. And he's designed Manhattan, which I will do for the channel at some point, and Airships, which has also been requested. Of course, Puerto Rico, probably his most famous game, as well as the card game version San Juan. A couple of lesser-known ones like Waldmeister, which I actually have, and I'm curious to try it. That's an oldie. But Thurn and Taxis, I mean, Manhattan won Game of the Year, and so did Thurn and Taxis. And, of course, Puerto Rico won a special award. Stay tuned at the end of this video, because I actually have a Q&A with the designer. Unfortunately, he's not going to be present in video sense, in the video format, because of the language difference. We did translations, and so we just exchanged emails, and I asked him some questions about Thurn and Taxis, which he was gracious enough to reply. So look forward to that. We'll do that at the end of the video. Now, Thurn and Taxis is for 2 to 4 players, ages 10 and up, and takes about an hour to play. All that is pretty fair. I've definitely played shorter games of Thurn and Taxis, but actually I've also played one like really long game that was like over 90 minutes. So that's not typical. Generally, the more players, the longer it'll take. A 4-player game will be about twice as long as a 2-player game. The name Thurn and Taxis is synonymous actually with those early kind of postal systems that were set up by the Thurn and Taxis family. And that family is still around. There's a countess, I believe, with great hair. In fact, the game comes with a little sheet explaining kind of the history of the post office in Central Europe, the postal system, and the Thurn and Taxis family. And that's an interesting read. I like to learn about that stuff. I had never heard the name before the game. Why don't I show you how it plays first? We'll talk then about why it's still a gem today. And remember, afterwards, we're going to do a little Q&A back and forth with the designer, Andreas Seyfarth. Again, just all words. No, you're not going to see his face. He's not going to talk. But I still think is an interesting discussion. To set up the game, place the board on the table between the players. Give each player all 20 houses of a single color, as well as the matching shed card. I don't know what you'd call it. I forget what the rules call them, but it's a building anyway. This is kind of your headquarters, I suppose. There's one for each of the different colors, so grab the one that matches your color and just put it in front of you. Now, there's a little bit of setup to the game. First, we have these carriage cards, and they have different values. You're going to sort them by the different values and place them on the matching spaces up here from lowest to highest. In this game, the shield represents victory points. Then you're going to get these tokens. There's many different types of tokens. You're going to arrange them by type and place them on the matching spots on the board. The one with the laurel wreath goes here. These ones, as you can see, there's different values. You're going to sort them with the highest valued one on top. Place them in a stack here. You're going to do that for all the different types. Then shuffle up the deck of cards and deal out 6 into these spaces here. You'll see each card shows a different city, And if you're not familiar with southern Germany, then you might not be very familiar with these locations. Just always remember that the colors of the names will match the region they're in. So you got this big gray area here, which has these gray cities. The purple is here. Usually pretty easy to find them. Place the rest of the deck nearby. And pick a start player. Play as clockwise. The goal in Thurn and Taxis is to score the most points. Every house, or I suppose they're post offices, you put on the board will keep you from losing a point. Any of these that you have left over at the end of the game, you will lose 1 point. You will get points for getting these tokens, as well as building up your carriage. You start off with no carriage. These carriages you will be able to claim in order as you build longer and longer routes. And that's the goal of the game, to build routes, to collect these cards either from the display or face down from the deck, and begin to build a route of these cards, these cities, connected to each other. So let me describe an example turn. Keep in mind that every turn you'll be able to use one of these people's special ability, but I won't explain that yet. The general flow of the turn is you're going to draw a card and then play a card. When you draw a card, you take from any of these 6 face up or 1 face down, and then when you play a card, you play a card face up in front of you. So for example, I might take Stuttgart and take it and put it face up in front of me. Whenever a card is taken from the display, you immediately replace it. And if there's no cards left in the deck, you can take all the discards and shuffle them up to form a new deck. After you play a card, you have the choice whether to finish the route or not. But you can only finish a route if it's at least of size 3. This is only a route of size 1, so obviously you would not be able to. So at the end of your turn, you need to decide whether to continue this route or finish it. But you can't finish if it's too small. This is only of size 1. You need at least a route of size 3 in order to close a route. Assuming you don't close the route, then on the start of your next turn, you must add to the route. So picture, I have Stuttgart. Right now my route is starting at Stuttgart, but I can extend in any of these directions. So I can take any of these cards. So I could take Mannheim, for example, and I put it on either side of Stuttgart. That shows this route. Right now my route is Stuttgart to Mannheim. Now if my turn comes around again and I want to take this one to build the route, I have to place it on either end. I've already been constructing this route from Stuttgart to Mannheim. Even though showing this, I could make the route from Stuttgart to Würzburg to Mannheim, I've already started this route, and you can only extend a route on the ends. So I had to decide whether to extend Mannheim or Stuttgart. Let's extend Mannheim, so I put down Würzburg here. This is my current route, Stuttgart to Mannheim to Würzburg. I could choose to stop there or continue. If I continue, then on my next turn, I have to add a card either connected to Würzburg or to Stuttgart. I can't insert cards in the middle. And if I'm not able to, you always have to play a card. So if you cannot play a card that extends the route, you would actually have to discard this route and start a new route with the new card you put down. You definitely want to avoid that if possible. Very hard to win if you have to discard a route. That's not how I had it. I had it like this, right? But if you want, you can also finish the route. I have this route. It is of size 3, which is the smallest route possible. I will close it. And when you close a route, you get to put down your houses. This is a little tricky to remember sometimes for people. You either have to pick one city in every province that your route spans to put a post office in, or you pick one province and all the cities in that province in your route you would put a post office down. So in this example, you can see I have one city in 3 different provinces. So I will pick the former option, one city in each of the different provinces. And I would put one in Stuttgart, one in Mannheim, and one in Würzburg, like that. It is very tempting to put them on the names, but then you can't see them. Make sure you put them kind of up here. Importantly, all players can be in all cities. By me being in Stuttgart, that does not mean you can't be in Stuttgart. We can both have post offices there. After you put down your post offices, then the cards go away. Starting with your next turn, you may start a new route. Now let's suppose it looked something like this. Now, I can choose one city in each province, or all the cities in one province. So in this example, I could put one in Mannheim, and one in either Stuttgart or Ulm. Or I can choose to only put in Mannheim. I pick this province to put all the post offices in the cities that I'm represented in this route in that province, or all in this province. But there's no way I can put all 3 down. That's not allowed in this situation. After you do that, the cards go away. The houses stay there, so maybe I'll just leave those in, something like that. If you do not have the card for that length of route yet, you get to claim it. So all these carriages are worth points at the end of the game. At the end of the game, you will score for your most valuable carriage, your biggest, longest carriage. But you have to get them in order. In order to claim this one, you need to build a route of size 3, which I just did. So I will take one of these cards and I will put it on top of my personal card here. At the end of the game, I'm scoring 2 points. If later on I create a route of size 4 and close it, I don't have to put 4 post offices on the board. The route has to be of 4 cards length or more. I could then take the 4. I would take the 4 and I would put it on top of the 3. At the end of the game, I'm scoring 3 points instead of 2. As you can see, they go more and more valuable. You can't skip. So even if I build a 5 route, and I would be able to get the 5, if I only have the 3, the next one at best can be a 4. So that can be a tricky thing to remember. Whenever you close a route, you can have no more than 3 city cards remaining in your hand. If you have more, you have to discard down to 3. But Daryl, I hear you asking, how can I have cards in my hand? You've only shown me drawing a card and playing a card. How would I get cards in my hand? Well, that's where these characters come in. During your turn, you can use one of these 4 special powers. They're available to everyone. And on your turn, you just simply choose one benefit. This character allows you to play 2 cards from your hand to the table in front of you instead of just 1. This character allows you to draw 2 cards instead of just 1. And, importantly, if you have no cards in your hand, then on your next turn you must pick him to draw 2 cards. And the 2 cards can be from here or here, any combination. But you can only use 1 power on your turn. One example start, like the first 2 turns of a game, might be use this guy, draw 2 cards, play 1. Next turn, use this guy, draw 1 card, play 2. Now you have 3 cards in front of you, close that, get this card. So you can get this in 2 turns instead of 3. That's a big part of the game, is using these characters to find these little efficiencies and get your post offices on the board faster, claim these cards and these tokens faster. If none of those cards look good, you can use this guy to flush all 6 cards that are here, flush them, they all go to the discard pile, draw 6 more face up, and then you draw 1 and play 1. So again, you're using him instead of any of the other ones. And finally, this guy needs some explanation. This is probably the most confusing guy in the game. This guy allows you to claim a carriage with a smaller route than you would normally need to in order to claim that carriage. Let's suppose I have the 4. So I need to get this, I want to get this card, right? The 5. In order to do that, I would need to build a route of 5 cities. But I actually don't. Instead, I can build a route of 3 cities and use this guy to claim a carriage up to 2 higher than the one I would normally be allowed to get with that route. So with this guy, I could claim a carriage of 5 with just a 3 route. But keep in mind, that doesn't allow you to skip these cards. If I didn't have the 4, and I claimed I finished a route of size 3 and used this guy, then I wouldn't get the 5, I would get the 4. And again, you can only use one of these special powers during your turn. You also get points from these tokens. The first player to place post offices in all the cities of a region will claim the topmost token that is still available. So if green is the first player to put their post offices in every city in the purple region, they get the purple token. The first one's worth 3 points. As you can see, it drops to 2 and then 1. This one, this two-tone one, is for these 3 cities. You can see this is a dark green, this is a light green. Then you have these 3 cities for this one. You have these 4 cities, the orange and the red regions. And you have the gray region, which is the biggest one and also worth the most. You also get points for finishing routes of a certain size. The first player to finish a route of size 5 will be able to claim the 5 token. That's worth 2 points. As you can see, these also go down in value as they're claimed. The first player to finish a 6 route would get this. The first player to finish a 7 route would get the top of this, and these, again, go down in value. Notably, this guy doesn't help you get those, he just helps you get these. So play continues clockwise until one of 2 things happen. Either one person is able to claim the 7 carriage, or one player is able to place all their post offices on the board. Then you finish the round, so each player has the same number of turns. And then total up your points. Your points are the most valuable of your carriages. So if you have a stack of these cards, like so, you'll get the points for your most valuable one, in this case the 5. You'll get points for each one of your tokens that you're able to claim. There's 2 more types of tokens. A player who is able to place at least one post office in every single colored region, that's where this one comes in, will be able to take the topmost one of these tokens. In the very first edition, you actually didn't have to have any post offices in the gray. It was like everything other than gray. But in practice, it's hard to put post offices everywhere other than gray. So they changed it later. So just one in everywhere. And the player who triggers the end of the game will also get a bonus point. And you'll minus 1 point for every house you have left in your supply. And the player with the most points wins. That's it. You're ready to play Thurn and Taxis. This game has been accused a little bit of having a pasted-on theme. This sort of criticism is common in the types of games I love, and it bothers me. I really don't like this criticism, because it's invariably applied to games that have simple rules. And when you have a game that has simple rules, there's only so much you can do to bring that setting alive, right? So you're abstracting a lot of stuff, and people then say if you abstract things enough, you can make it about anything. The thing about the postal system as a setting for this game, I find it works really, really well, because the game is all about efficiency. A normal turn consists of drawing a card and playing a card, but the rolls give you an extra bonus, and you want to maximize that bonus. So I'll give you an example. Normally, if you didn't use any rolls at all, you would draw a card and play a card. Well, you would play until you get 3 cities, right? Then you can close that route and build in those 3 cities. So that would normally need 3 turns. But with the correct use of the rolls, you can do that in 2 turns. You can draw an extra card in the first turn, and you can play an extra card in the second turn. So it's things like that that lend to the efficiency feeling. And also because you're trying to get as many of your post offices on the board as possible. And that really depends on the regions and which cities that you have in your route and what regions they span. So, for example, if you're able to have all 3 cities in the same region, great. You'll put all 3 post offices in that same region. If you're able to span 3 different regions, great. You'll put a post office in each of the 3 different regions. But what if you're in 2 regions? You have 2 in one and 1 in another. In that case, you're only putting down 2 post offices, right? Either 2 in the same or 1 in each of the different regions. It's these tiny little things that you're trying to do to get that little bit of an edge. Trying to do something in 1 turn less than you need to, or trying to get as many of your houses out on the board in as few turns possible. And all that lends itself to a really efficient use of your actions. And so that's why I think the post office actually feels pretty appropriate as a setting for this game. You can imagine that post offices are all about efficiency, right? It's about efficiency, but it's not really about planning. It's so important what cards you get, and there is obviously a lot of luck there. So you have 6 to choose from, and of course, as one of the actions, you can flush, get rid of those and draw all 6 new face-up cards to choose from, but that's wasting your bonus, right? So you don't want to do that, but if what you need is not there, then you kind of have to do it, but you're taking a risk. Maybe you'll spend that bonus doing the flush, and turns out that the cards that come up are not what you need, right? Of course, you can draw blind from the deck. That's taking a risk. But the game is also really unforgiving, okay? So the important thing is that on your turn, you have to decide whether to extend your route next turn or close it now. And there's a bit of a risk there, because if you don't have the card you need to play next turn, you're hoping it'll come up, but what if it doesn't? If you take that risk, so you have some cards face up in front of you, and then your turn comes around, you said, I'm going to extend it, so you wait until your next turn, and you find out that based on the cards, maybe you flush or whatever, but you still don't get the card you need, but you have to play a card, and if you can't play a card to your route, you start over. You trash those and start a whole new route. And that's murder in this game. If you have to do that and the other players are not incompetent, you have lost, basically. But it's very hard to get new players, players who haven't played before, to understand the seriousness of the decision of whether to close now or extend. And it's something that I always kind of just drill into people. It's like, remember, if you're choosing to extend, you have to play a card on your next turn. And if you can't, you won't get anything for this route. You'll have to start your route all over again from the beginning. And that's something, because it's so unforgiving, people don't expect that. People expect that, okay, well, I'm not going to close yet. Okay, my next turn comes around. Oh, I can't play. Okay, well, I'm going to close this route now and then start a new one. It's like, no, you can't. You can't close it. You decided to continue, and you took a risk, and that risk didn't pay off, and now those cards are just gone. Those turns you took building up this route are now gone, and you've wasted those turns, and that is murder in this game. But I like that sort of unforgiving nature. I like games that have simple rules and are very interactive, which this game isn't really, but are still kind of unforgiving. A game should punish you for doing badly, and it should reward you for playing well. And this game does that. Some people complain, it's like, oh, the scores are always so close by the end. Yeah, if everybody's playing well, that may happen, but I have been in games where like one player was way, way far behind, And I like that. It creates stakes, right? And it adds a real risk to that risk-reward decision. In a lot of games, there's smoothed over so much that if you make a mistake, it's like, oh, well, you do something else, and everything will score you points, right? You know, it seems like a lot of games these days are like, well, I really want to do that one thing that gives me 3 points. It's like, oh, no, I can't do it. I'm forced to only do this thing that gives you 2 points. And then, yeah, it's like, it's not that much worse, right? And in the end, you can't really feel a whole lot of emotion about it. But in this game you can, because there are stakes. If you make that decision to, I'm going to extend my route next turn, but I don't have the cards for it yet, that's tense. There's a tension there. And then when your turn comes around again and you're hoping, and maybe you do get a card that you can use, but it's not the card you wanted, so it's not ideal, but you make do. It's actually possible to count cards a little bit in this game, because the deck is composed of, I think it's 3 cards for every city. So it can be worthwhile over the course of the game if they're particularly important cities that you kind of want to keep an eye out to see, like, well, I've already seen all 3 of those, and we're not through the deck yet, so there's definitely not going to be more until we reshuffle the deck. You can do stuff like that. In general, it's a minor thing, but it does give you a very slight edge if you're able to keep an eye out for some of the important kind of cities. The game is very elegant. I know elegant is an overused word in the hobby, but it does have simple rules. It is generally easy to learn, and it does have important decisions to make, and the decisions matter. So the game had a couple of expansions. One game of the year, generally the games of the year, the Spiel des Jahres winners, will have spin-offs or expansions or what have you. And this one had a little mini expansion in Spielbox called the Princess's Courier, Princess's Messenger, something like that. And you can proxy this too. You don't need to find the original Spielbox expansion. You can get some cardboard coins from some crappy game and add them. It'll do the same thing. It sort of adds a form of currency, sort of. So the envelopes, I guess, but again, you can use any sort of proxy like coins. You put one on every city, and the first player to build a post office in that city gets that. So this is a currency that you can spend to basically use more than one roll on your turn. Normally you're limited to just picking one of the 4 bonuses. Well, you can't pick the same one twice, but you could pick a second different one by paying envelopes. And also, players start with envelopes, and they start with different numbers of envelopes based on number of players. So it's a nice addition, especially if you're concerned about turn order advantage. Personally, I've never had a problem really in this game with turn order advantage. It is beneficial to go first in this game. Obviously, you're going to have an edge when you're going for those, first to fill up the purple cities or something. You're going to have an advantage there. And if you're able to trigger the end of the game, and you're slightly more likely to do that if you're the start player, you get a bonus again. Have the youngest player go first. It's not a big deal. And there is an advantage to going later because you can kind of control the pace, like where the game or when the game will end. Sometimes you can finish it off, especially with a clever use of the Cartwright. You can finish it off and say, okay, I've ended the game. And then the start player's like, what? I don't get another turn? I need one more turn to close my route, but I can't do it now. So it's never been a big problem for me, but if it's a concern for you, this does address it. And you also compete for this sort of standee for the messenger. And while you have the standee, you get a discount on the bonus rolls that you're choosing, and you get bonus points at the end if you have it at the end. And so there's more competition. You're trying to fight to be the one to have that. It's not a hot potato. That implies it's bad. It's a cool potato. It's a nice, easy expansion to add. It does add more options on your turn, which I'm told is a good thing. Everybody likes more options, right? I personally like a more restrictive game in which you have less choice, but it makes each choice more important and riskier. right? Sometimes if you have so many options, you can do whatever you want, then you can do whatever you want, and then there isn't as much tension. But I like the expansion. I don't play with it often. I have it. And it's a fun addition, and it does change the game a little bit. It just makes it just a little bit more involved, and I would actually argue maybe feels a little bit more modern now. I think maybe if Thurn and Taxis came out today, maybe just throw that little mini expansion in there and make it the way to play. I think for modern hobbyists to play with that mini expansion is probably the way to go. And again, you don't have to search high and low for it. You can proxy it. Now, there are two major expansions for the game. So the first one is called Power and Glory. And the main thing about that is it comes with a different map. The game comes with a new way of sort of building routes. So the cards have, on the backs of them, they have horses. So just like in the base game, the face of the card shows a city, but on the back it shows horses. And there's a sort of more of a planning aspect kind of in front of you, because in order to be able to build a longer route, you have to add horses to your route to make it longer. It's a nice little bit of variety there. And even if you don't much care for that, like, it's not better or worse, it's just different. But it's completely easy to play the new map with the original rules. You don't have to bother with the horses. You just play it just like you normally would a regular base game of Thurn and Taxis, but just on a new map. So great for variety. If you love the game, you'll like having a second map for it. Again, just for the variety. And Power and Glory actually has a little bit of a joke in there, which gets lost in the translation, because the German name is Glanz und Gloria. Gloria being glory, but of course Gloria is also a name, and it's the name of the Countess Gloria Thurn and Taxis. So it's a little bit of a, hey, I see what you did there kind of thing. So all roads lead to Rome. Now this one goes in some different directions. So on the one hand, there's these, as you choose roles in the game, you get kind of these bonus tokens. And the game kind of encourages you to choose the roles kind of evenly. I just remember it was fine. That's the one half of the expansion that is the expansion is not named for, so it's kind of the forgettable one. It's fine though. The actual Rome part. So you have a little sideboard, and it has these carriages that are lined up on one end. At the other end is Rome, and they have these paths that go kind of in all these different. They kind of interweave. And when you are closing a route in a city that you could normally put a house, a post office, if you decline doing that, then you get to move a carriage of the matching color. Now, why is that important? Well, at the beginning of the game, you assign different values to the different carriages. Every player is in every carriage, but they're worth different values to different players. And so you want an audience with the Pope, so you want your carriage to reach Rome, but it's worth more the later in the game that it arrives, as long as it arrives before the end, right? A little bit of there's a nice tension there, obviously, because, you want to progress your carriage and you want it to reach Rome, but you don't want it to be the first to reach Rome. You want it to, come a little bit later, but not too late, right? So again, it's completely fine. It's the expansion that probably changes up the game the most. And that one's going to be a little bit divisive. Any second expansion really is like this. I feel like usually the first expansion for a game is kind of like a more of the same expansion, right? Here's some this is what the game is like. Here's some more stuff that's also like that. Maybe some variety, maybe a new board, right? A new map. And the second expansion is like, well, we have to add something new, right? Just another map is not going to cut it. Like, we need to go in a different direction here. Honestly, the second expansion is kind of optional. First expansion is optional too, but if you like Thurn and Taxis, you're probably going to like the first expansion, Power and Glory, because it's more of the same, and it's more variety, a different map. Now, this has not been in print for quite a long time. And, I mean, being a Spiel des Jahres winner, and still feeling relatively modern in the sense that it's that kind of, and I don't mean this derisively, the multiplayer solitaire type of thing, where we're not interfering with each other, right? Let's just do our own thing, and may the best racer win kind of game. And that's a very modern style. And this came out in 2006. Not that recent, but it still fits into that more modern feel. So I have to assume this game will be reprinted, republished at some point, hopefully not with anthropomorphic animals. But if you want it and you don't mind a used copy, it's not too hard to find. Last time I checked, there are more people who are trading their copies away or willing to trade them away than there are wanting in trade. So anyway, that usually means that it should be fairly easy to get in trade. When I looked at the marketplace, though, prices were all over the place. So it really depends. Remember, you don't need an English copy. This is language independent. It's a Spiel des Jahres winner, so it's definitely worthwhile to try. And the game was a hit. I mean, Ticket to Ride is really popular, and this was considered at the time to be, for gamers, a nice little step up. Still possible for casual gamers to play, certainly. Not quite as visceral as Ticket to Ride. Your emotions aren't going to feel as high or as low as you do playing Ticket to Ride. It's a different experience. And it's still a lot of fun. It's a more quiet, thoughtful kind of experience. But like I said, by modern standards, it fits right in still. And it's still a really good game. The restrictions that are put in place to keep you from doing exactly what you want to just add that little bit of frustration that's necessary to add sort of the tension and the emotion to the game. I mean, there's a little bit of push your luck aspect, but there's also just the hoping that you can make what you have work, right? You have this city and you have this city and they're not connected, but I'm really hoping next turn to get something that connects them, and I'm hoping for this one, but even if I get this one, it's okay. And there's a lot of those sorts of moments of worry, but in a good way. And the fact that they do have a bit of punishment there, which is something that is sorely lacking in a lot of games. That, okay, you can do this if you want, and you know what? Probably you'll be okay, but you might not. The cards might not come out the way you want to, and you took that risk, and you are going to pay for it. And not enough games these days have that. So maybe in that sense it doesn't fit as well in the modern sense. Because it's, on the one hand, it's a very friendly game. It's not very competitive because all you're doing is racing for objectives. But at the same time, it can be really punishing. So it's an interesting combination. Let's tell you a brief little story. So this was just before the pandemic. Me and a couple of friends got together. We hadn't gotten together in a while. There's me and one friend who had played Thurn and Taxis once years and years ago and didn't much care for it. But then we were playing with another couple, and they loved Thurn and Taxis. And we were playing in my restaurant. We have Thurn and Taxis in the restaurant. In fact, we have one couple who comes, and every time I see that couple in the restaurant, they're always playing Thurn and Taxis. My friend, our friend was like, well, I didn't really like it when I played, but that was 10, 15 years ago. So yeah, I'd like to try it again. And we played, and it was great. And at the end, my friend said, how come they don't make games like this anymore? And I always come back to that. I've been thinking about that a lot, and I had to share that in the video because it's true, they don't really make games like that anymore. They tickle the brain. This one is not the best example of sort of interactivity, but in terms of a great ratio of rules complexity, or lack thereof, but interesting decisions, and giving you enough rope to hang yourself. Those games, if you can find them, they're golden. Thurn and Taxis definitely fits that. And how come they don't make games like this anymore? I asked that same question. They should, and they should reprint this game too. Now this is a treat. It's the first for Board Gems. I have a sort of an interview, a Q&A, with the designer of the game that I'm covering, Thurn and Taxis. The designer is Andreas Seyfarth, with his wife Karen. but I interviewed Mr. Seyfarth. Leo to his friends. I am not one of his friends. It's Mr. Seyfarth. Herr Seyfarth for me. Anyway, there's been a couple of times where I've done a video on an older game and the designer has reached out to me afterwards, thanked me for the video, or we chatted a bit. And it's always nice, and I always have that, I love hearing from the designers. And, but there's always that little bit of disappointment. It's like, oh, this happened after the video. Right? But I'm not, maybe confidence is not the right word, but I don't feel like I'm going to put in a lot of effort to try to contact these designers before I do the video, because who the hell am I, right? But through a mutual acquaintance, I was able to get the email address for Andreas Seyfarth, and he was gracious enough to answer questions. Now, this is a visual medium. It really would be nice if it was a video interview, but of course, Seyfarth, his language, his main language is German, mine is English. There's going to be translation issues in between. So I just thought, especially for this first time, I wasn't going to try to push for that. I'll just send you a few questions, Mr. Seyfarth. If you can answer them, that would be amazing. And he did. And it is amazing. So for Board Gems, we get to do a Q&A with the designer. So I'm going to read my questions and read out his answers. So just a couple of brief notes before I get into this. For one thing, this is obviously translated, so the designer would have originally answered these in German and then translated them to English using the service DeepL, and then I think tweaked a little bit manually. So the answers aren't going to be perfect English. The other thing is the questions. So I've never done this before, and I don't really consume a lot of board game media nowadays, but like in the old days when I would listen to interviews and podcasts, say, with designers, I was always disappointed with the interviews because, they ended up being interviews about like the designer and like who they are, like what are their hobbies, what's your favorite color, like that's not so interesting to me. And especially because this video is not about Andreas Seyfarth or his wife, Karen. It's about their game. I tried to limit my questions to the game itself and not so much about them. That's just because that's what I wanted to ask. So I've never done this sort of thing before. Maybe these questions are terrible. Let's give it a try. Let's see how it goes. So question 1, what was the initial inspiration for the game? The initial seed that captured your and/or Karen's imagination, that this is an idea for a game worth pursuing. I really wanted to make a stagecoach-themed game and try different approaches. The most elaborate approach was an 1830s-style game, but it never worked. That's interesting. Another approach was a transport of travelers and mail, pick up and deliver, but that would have become another empire builder. So I tried around for a while and put it aside again. Then when I started a Trans-Europe Express-themed game, it became clear that its gameplay fit the stagecoach theme perfectly, without laying any tracks, of course. Question 2. Any interesting stories about the design process? Any major changes from the initial concept during development? His answer. The game was initially based purely on cards that were laid out to routes. In order to get an overview of the geography, an overview plan was required. An essential step was then to make a game board from this overview plan and to place houses on it. The supporting roles were initially tightly tied to the players with the ability to switch, but free use has proven better. That's interesting. So, in the current design sort of publication, the roles, they're just always available, and on your turn you just pick one. But in sort of the initial design, they were tied to the players, and the players could change them. That reminds me, it sounds a little bit like Ratus, that you have like a particular role that gives you a benefit, and you hang on to it until like somebody takes it from you or something. That's really interesting, and I wonder what Thurn and Taxis would have been like that. Question 3. How did the idea of using the postal system setting come about? It fits quite well when you consider how important efficiency is to gameplay. Was another setting considered? Answer. The postal theme was the origin of the game. It could have been a pure transport game, however, the required efficiency in the game also fits the theme quite well. Question 4. I understand there was discussion with the Countess Gloria von Thurn and Taxis so as to use the name. Was that difficult? Were there any concerns that needed to be addressed to get her approval? At any point was another name considered, assuming that you couldn't get permission? Answer. The publisher was kind enough to take on this clarification, and fortunately immediately found open ears. So we were lucky and didn't have to look for another name. Gloria was really interested, and we also played a game of Thurn and Taxis with her after release. Oh, that's lovely. Your wife Karen is co-designer. How does the collaborative design process differ for this compared to your other games? I understand collaboration isn't always so clear-cut, but were there particular areas of the game you could point to and say, Karen had this idea, or I worked on this part? Answer. My wife Karen is always involved in the prototyping of a game, on the one hand for testing, on the other hand to make the game more elegant. I tend to get lost in too many rules. With Thurn and Taxis, her contribution was so significant that she was also named as designer. So what I picture from this is that if it was Andreas Seyfarth just working alone, Thurn and Taxis would have been a much more elaborate game. And it was really the influence of Karen Seyfarth that made it more elegant and more streamlined, which seems to be her role in every one of their designs, is to help with the streamlining, making it simpler, more efficient. It's very interesting. Question. Of course, it is also a collaboration with the publisher. Hans im Glück is said to have a very strong development team, of which you, I believe, are often a part. How did other developers influence the direction of development, or was the design mostly complete when you brought it to them? Answer. The contribution of the publisher Hans im Glück to the development of the game cannot be overestimated. I'd probably say overstated. Cannot be overstated. That's how important it is. That was already the case with Manhattan and Waldmeister, which are two games published by Hans im Glück, designed by Seyfarth before Thurn and Taxis. And it also applies to almost all other games that appear in Hans im Glück. The joint development work with Bernd Brunhofer, former head of the publisher, Dieter Hornung, idea generator, and the many development steps that take place with more people involved in the development process make it difficult to assign concrete ideas to a single person. If I had to estimate it, I would attribute about 60% of the original design and the remaining 40% to co-development, whereby it is clear that the 60% could never have been published, and the 40% would not have been created without the origins of the 60%. I really like that window into the development process. I mean, obviously it's short on details, and as he points out, you can't really provide many details about like who did what. I didn't expect that kind of answer. Like if you look at the published game, about 60% of it was the original design, 40% was due to development changes. It's important to note, he noted it, both are important. You can't just have development, you need that initial seed of an idea. But alone, maybe it wouldn't have been publishable, just wouldn't have been good enough. But you need that development to polish it and make it just as good as it can be. So I like to see the percentages mentioned, that's interesting. When you decide to approach a publisher with a design idea, how much does the game style influence which publisher to approach? For example, for Thurn and Taxis, did you two say to yourselves, this game might be a good fit for Hans im Glück? Whereas I imagine Puerto Rico's complexity lent itself better to the Alea brand. The answer is quite simple. I know both publishers and the main people behind them very well, so I also know what they like to publish. Puerto Rico would probably also have appeared in Hans im Glück, but certainly in a completely different version. Back then it was simply time to work with Stefan Bruck from Alea. Forgive me, I'm reading between the lines a little bit, because when he says Puerto Rico could have been published by Hans im Glück, but it would have been a much different game. And again, that's where the development comes in. Because I can picture if Puerto Rico was in the hands of the Hans im Glück development team, it would have become more streamlined, perhaps more efficient. Maybe not now. If it came out now, it probably would be more elaborate. There's a lot of kind of bigger, complex games from Hans im Glück now, more so than back then. But, at that time, there probably would have been a lot of opportunity, a lot of desire on the part of Hans and Gluck to develop, to change, to tweak, and that tweaking, that development process would have been very different. It would have taken the game in a much different direction than it did at Alea. And certainly with all the awards and kudos that Puerto Rico has achieved, it was the right decision to go that route with Alea. Board Game Geek says Thurn and Taxis was last printed in 2013, a German-only printing. Is there any discussion about it being released again in the near future, either with Hans and Gluck or another publisher? In a perfect world, would you like to see any changes in the presentation, or what is included in the box when a new edition is eventually made? Answer: there have always been cautious requests for localization in other countries, but nothing has come of it so far. I'm currently working on 2 variants, but the gameplay should differ significantly from the original. Unfortunately, I can't give any more details on this. So I wonder how to interpret that, because it could be maybe that it won't be Thurn and Taxis itself, but it could be, it'd be a bit late to call it a spin-off, but it sounds like definitely there's the inspiration of Thurn and Taxis. We might see a new type of game from the core of Thurn and Taxis. Again, reading between the lines a little bit there. If the original were re-released, I would only make one small change. At the start of the game, each player is given 3 city cards to give newcomers a better sense of where the journey is going. That makes sense, actually. It probably be a pretty easy change to make in just the copy that you may have at home now. If you're introducing it to new players, maybe give them 3 free cards and let them plan that way. I have a theory. A game's first expansion often contains ideas that the designers had during the design of the base game, but did not make the final product. Whereas a game's second expansion often contains new ideas and the authors try to take the game in a different direction. Would you say that is the case with Thurn and Taxis' 2 expansions, Glanz und Gloria and Alle Wege führen nach Rom? Answer: Thurn and Taxis was an almost perfect, quote-unquote, game when it was released, and no other viable ideas were left behind. The ideas for both expansions only came about when the distributors wanted more after being voted Game of the Year. But your theory is not so wrong. I follow this path with a new development. I don't know if he's talking in general or of a particular new development that he's working on right now. I'm going to assume he means more generally. That when you're working on an expansion that you might take some ideas that were discarded before and try to work them into a whole new thing. And of course, it doesn't necessarily have to be an expansion. If there's an idea that you ditched in your original idea that didn't make the final product, that idea could still work in a completely different game, of course. The last question, this is not really specific to Thurn and Taxis, but this is sort of my interest, so it's like, I have to ask him this question because I'm interested in this. In the early 1990s, games tended to be directly competitive, such as Manhattan. In the late 90s and early 2000s, you began to see games in which players worked on their own boards, but there was still important player interaction, such as with Puerto Rico. Then into the mid to late 2000s and onward, the trend was toward very little direct interaction, with players working on their own and racing for objectives, such as Thurn and Taxis and Airships. This gradual change in style is reflected in your published designs. Was this a deliberate choice? What factors do you think influenced this change in your design style? Answer: the expert games have come a long way from being confrontational to being competitive and influencing to being cooperative. I don't think he uses cooperative in the sense of like a cooperative board game necessarily, but just the opposite of competition, basically. So complete indirect competition. That has a lot to do with game taste, including that of the designers. Players and designers do not want to experience a major catastrophe in a game that throws them far back. They prefer to work together against it. Although I would argue that Thurn and Taxis, you can experience a major catastrophe if you take that chance trying to extend your route and you can't get the cards you need. I'm going to be honest, I was hoping for a little bit more from that answer, but I do have his permission to contact him again when I do videos on Manhattan and Airships. So I might try to, if he's willing, I might try to explore that, because that's a really interesting topic for me, to see the evolution of games And because Seyfarth publishes so few board games, it's really notable. Like when you look at his designs, you can see that trend very clearly. Where you have Manhattan, which is directly where we're button heads, and Puerto Rico, we're doing our own thing on our own little board, but I've got to pay attention to what's going on with the other players. And then you have Thurn and Taxis and Airships, in which you're not really caring what the other players do. Maybe it's obvious to some people, but I think it's a topic worth exploring. I may send a follow-up question to him, at least when I get around to doing another video. So I hope you enjoyed that simple Q&A. Like I said, it would have been great if it was video, but with the language difference and the time zone difference and not wanting to bother him too much, I thought I'd take what I can get. And I just did a very simple Q&A over email. Like I said, I tried to limit the questions to the game more so than about him, which at least I found, I don't know about nowadays, but at least in the past, I found that a lot of the questions that designers get just aren't really like deep into the game part of it. They just seem more superficial. So with this Q&A, I really wanted to get into some of the interesting bits about Thurn and Taxis specifically. It's my first time doing this. I don't know how good this was, how good my questions were, but it was fun. And I really want to thank Andreas Seyfarth and also Tom, who is the mutual acquaintance who helped me get in touch with him and offered. I didn't even ask him. He's like, would you like to talk to Andreas Seyfarth? And I was like, yes, I would. I would like that very much if that could at all be arranged. And it was arranged. So that was lovely. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Mr. Seyfarth. And thank you for watching. Good segue. Thanks for watching. Remember, older games like Thurn and Taxis don't stop being good just because newer games come out. Take care.